There are many effective passing styles within the sport of jiu-jitsu. Height passing with knee cuts, under the legs passing with stacks and double unders, but possibly no passing style is as effective and as popular as outside passing. Currently one of the best in the world at this sole method is Dorian Olivarez. Dorian is one of the most relentless jiu-jitsu athletes in the sport today. From gaining notoriety under the B team with Craig Jones and Nicky Ryan, to swapping to their bitter rivals at Kingsway with Danaher and Gordon Ryan, Dorian has been crushing his competition for years under the tutelage of his father. As a competitive folk-style wrestler, he already had a great base to take on most high-level jiu-jitsu athletes. But we've seen good wrestlers transition to jiu-jitsu, yet get very stuck when it comes to passing the guard and dealing with leg entanglements. This is where Dorian separates himself from the pack. Passing an elite athlete's guard is undoubtedly the hardest skill in jiu-jitsu. However, if you learn Dorian's strategy and techniques, you can make one of the hardest parts of the sport look easy. I've watched all of Dorian's ADCC trial wins, his superfight wins on shows like CGI and AIGA, then finally his most recent victory at UFC BJJ. Then analysed all of them and corresponded with Dorian himself to figure out how his passing is so effective. In this video, we're going to break down the 3 simple techniques he uses to beat his competition, then finally the one concept he uses that makes him a world-class guard passer instead of a mediocre one. Let's get into it. The foundation of Dorian's passing comes from the J-point / hip and knee post passing. You've probably already seen a million videos on this technique already, so we'll skim through the basics, then see how Dorian has revolutionized this position for his own game. The idea is we want to get to our opponent's jeopardy point, which is what the J in J-point stands for. And to get there, we need to advance past our opponent's hip line. Once we do this, our opponent is in real danger of getting their guard passed. So they ideally need to stop their ideas of attacking and begin thinking about how they're going to defend. Usually this comes in the form of framing with the arms, then high pummeling the top leg to square up or entangle the passer, or pummeling the bottom leg to the hip, again to square up, or entangle our opponent, usually with a K-guard entry. Therefore, to complete our J-point pass, we need to control, then break all their defensive abilities. Those being framing with the arms, defending the high pummel, and preventing the low leg. Dorian's built a unique game off each of these responses, but before we get into those, we'll look at the traditional options from this position. To prevent the high pummel, we're taking a grip on the hip or even the ribs, then flaring our elbow out to solidify this inside position. Then keeping our head low to nullify the space our opponent needs to pummel their leg into. Against a flexible opponent, this may still not be enough, and in these cases turning the hips away can make even the most flexible of guards, like Pavel here, struggle to get their top leg back in and retain. To defend against a low leg, we're quite simply controlling the knee and pushing it away from their chest with our hand. This also fatigues their core, as they must fight to close off this space by their hip to prevent the top player passing straight away. So, we've controlled the legs. Now it's finally time to beat the arm frames, and here we want to apply the concept Rob Bianchi and Joseph call leading edge. That being, whatever part of our body is closing the distance, our opponent should frame that body part to prevent the pass. With this idea in mind, we want to change the body part we lead with to close the distance, as if we rapidly change this leading edge, it will become very difficult for our opponent to frame the correct body part and henceforth prevent the passer from closing that distance. What you'll notice in Dorian's passing style is he begins each pass attempt with attacking the J-point. However, he never actually completes the pass here, probably because athletes in this weight division are insanely fast and flexible. So instead of applying camping pressure like Joseph does, Dorian's built a system around countering each defensive option from his opponents. The main ones, remember, being the high leg, the low leg, and framing with the arms. So let's see how he counters the most common one first, the high pummel. The main defensive reaction that is used is the high pummel, and as we spoke about earlier, to complete this retention technique we need to take our leg and place it by the near shoulder as a frame. Most people look to close off this space by just getting their head low, however Dorian does something different. Instead of keeping his head low, he connects his ear to his shoulder, which in turn blocks off the space for the high pummel to come into the near shoulder. The high pummel can still come in however, but instead it will go across to the far shoulder, which opens up the ability for Dorian's signature passing move, the cross scoop grip. Whenever the foot comes to the far shoulder, the guard player has overextended themselves, opening up the passer to start taking a cross scoop grip and transitioning towards the back. Now that we are all the way behind our opponent and their hips are away, they are in real danger of getting their guard passed. A big mistake people make when doing this technique is they rush, place their knee to the floor and turn straight away, which allows the guard player to high leg again and retain. So instead we must look to bring our head over their head. This in turn weights their far shoulder and turns their hips away at the same time, making the high pummel obsolete. Now from this position, some will choose to turtle and to not get scored on, but others will work to turn in and face. Taking a crossface and an underhook in this scenario is going to be pretty tricky, so instead we should always look to cover the hips, block the knees, and complete the pass going to north-south. This ear to shoulder method completely kills the high pummel. You'll notice how Dorian makes it seem so effortless in high intensity matches. Even against world-class guard players like Gianni Grippo, there really is little you can do to prevent this. So, this is Dorian's way of dealing with the high pummel, but how does he deal with the low leg? This brings us on to the next technique. In recent matches, his opponents have begun to clock onto his game, of getting to the J point and using this position to transition to cross scoop counters and his other pass options. So they look to block and prevent his ability to flank and get to the hip line. How? By extending their legs. The fatal flaw with this method occurs as they begin squaring up. The extended legs prevent the flank, but when they square up, both feet often come high above the line of their knees, and this in turn exposes the back of the guard player's ankles, allowing Dorian to take double C grips and stack their feet to the mat. What's traditionally done from this position is solidifying the stack by placing our knee behind the hamstring, then feeding our arm across to the opposite hip and positioning ourselves in a leg drag. But Dorian pretty much always wants to get to north-south, so instead of going to a leg drag, he will look to take his opposing arm to the far hip to turn the legs away from him and solidify his first reverse underhook. Then use his head and second arm to block the legs and knees coming back in and work to north-south. The completion rate of this technique in no-gi, however, is pretty slim, as it's quite easy for opponents to just move their head away, build up to their arm, and post on the elbow to escape, just like how Marcelo Garcia retained very frequently. Performing this retention strategy in the gi is much trickier, as we have access to the lapel and the drawstring of the pants. However, in no-gi we don't have that luxury, so instead, Dorian will quite happily settle for this lower completion rate, as each time his opponent is in this stacking position or doing late stage retention, they're using a lot of energy, which in a long match can be more productive for Dorian than outright finishing the pass the first time. Alternatively, in a sub-only match with no points, locking your hands by the waist is an unbelievably strong position that is becoming popular with athletes like Little Jacob. This can allow you to apply a lot of pressure through the neck and ultimately force a roll into a front headlock scenario. So, we've looked at how Dorian deals with the high leg in the J-point position, and now how he deals with an early anticipated low leg. But how does he deal with the frames? This leads us on to the final technique. Just quickly, if you're finding this video helpful and want more match/technique analysis videos, I've just set up a Patreon with lots of content already available. Analysis on things like Pavel's fall sweep, Gordon Ryan, Matej Szczynski, and much more. It's only £6 a month, and you'll be really helping out the channel and making more videos like this one possible. Anyways, back to it. I use the term technique here loosely, so just stick with it and bear with me quickly. When Dorian beats the hip line and gets to the hip and knee post, to beat his opponent's arm frames he will often look to instead beat the shoulder line and pass to north-south. We spoke about leading edge earlier, how we want to change the body part we drive in with to clear said frames. However, Dorian doesn't directly do this, yet he still passes. How? Because of angle change. Let's take a look. Imagine the bottom player is doing a bench press. For him to be able to lift the maximum amount comfortably and safely, he needs to extend his arms fully in a straight line perpendicular to his body. On this plane, his arms and weight bearing ability is very good, as a large percentage of his weight is being held by his strong pectoral muscles and front deltoids, not to mention the strength of a fully extended skeletal structure as well. You can see this in many scenarios in north-south passing, and even regular passing scenarios such as extending the top player away in a split squat scenario. Now imagine we change the movement. The guard player is no longer bench pressing, but instead doing something between an overhead press and an incline bench press. Now a high percentage of weight is instead being held by the shoulder muscles, which are inherently weaker, and getting the arms into full extension is much harder in this position. This is what happens when Dorian angles to north-south. As he leads with his upper body, the bottom player bench presses that weight away. But the second he passes the shoulder line, the weight has transitioned from being on a bench pressing plane to more of a shoulder pressing plane. Furthermore, when Dorian does this, it often breaks the full extension of the guard player's arms, where the skeletal structure is strong. And when this happens, the arms begin to bend and can no longer hold weight as effectively. So, after all that, we now need to complete the pass. The most common issue we'll run into is beating the legs. For the bottom player to retain, they need to bring weight onto their neck and shoulders, as this allows them to bring their knees in and manage distance, or look to hook an armpit and square up. So if we can get weight off their neck and shoulders, defending will be very tricky, and a popular way of doing this is scooping the head and lifting, bringing the weight off the shoulders and allowing us to complete our pass, or begin to camp and fatigue them. The next most common defensive reaction is misaligning their head from our center line. Dorian has a unique way of preventing this. He takes a grip deep on the tricep. Why? Well, this is what he says. He uses the grip to keep them north-south and prevent them squaring back up. And as he flares his elbow and turns his hip down to the mat, it makes the frame easier to clear. You can see how effective this grip is in preventing this misalignment from occurring. If our tricep grip is on the inside, we'll be able to better pin the shoulder to the mat and stop them turtling up. If we take an outside tricep grip, we'll marginally lose this pinning ability, but instead we'll gain strong submission threats, such as this dorsal kimura. In practice, these are the 3 techniques he uses, which realistically anyone can employ right away. Now, Dorian obviously has impeccable pace and cardio, which makes this strategy harder to employ if you're just an average practitioner. But there is one concept he uses which changes his passing style from being average to elite, and anybody can employ this. Before we get onto this last concept, if you want to improve specific parts of your game and save hours of time studying, you need the outlier database. Instead of watching hours of match footage for a particular technique you're working on, you can just type it into the database and see hundreds of examples of it at the highest level straight away. I've used it for years now and I absolutely love it. Use code ROB for a $10 discount off your first month, and let's get back to the video. Dorian is known for his heavy outside passing game. However, since joining Kingsway under John and Gordon, his biggest revolution has been his ability to mix passing styles. So what does this look like? If we just hammer away one style of passing, our opponent can anticipate and adapt quickly. If we just outside pass, for example, it can be easy to use guard retention strategies to nullify that style. Same as if we just try to knee cut or stack pass. They can begin to set up their defense and prevent your passes easily. But the second you begin mixing 2 passing styles, your opponent will be much less able to anticipate your attacks and henceforth how to defend. Dorian does this in 2 main ways. Number 1 is chaining loose passing into tight passing. He'll look to outside pass in the manner we looked at earlier. However, sometimes his opponent's defense is too readily set up to prevent the north-south pass or the cross scoop grip entry. So instead of sticking to outside passing, he'll use the inside space of his elbow to drop into a chest-to-chest half guard position and pass tight instead, by tripoding and using his secondary leg to break the configuration of his opponent's legs and look to pass into side control or mount. The second main way is Dorian may be struggling to get to the hip or shoulder line. Outside passing to these demarcation lines requires you to manage all this distance. Instead, we can look to tight pass with a knee cut. Now, knee slicing high to the shoulder line is faster and requires much less distance, as you can see here. To aid in the pass's completion, Dorian also looks to clear any frames mid-transition, making it easier for him to close the distance and get chest to chest. This is the crucial concept to beat world-class guards: your ability to mix passing styles. Elite athletes can defend one style quite comfortably, but when you throw 2, 3, or 4 passing styles at your opponent in conjunction, it can often be too much to handle. You don't need hundreds of techniques, just 3 or 4 that you know really well and that work together nicely. If you enjoyed this video, you'll like this video I did on Andrew Taki's wrestling.